This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. This is Python's Paradise, your film and music show. And folks, I have a guest on the phone today. It's the third time he's been on. And when he comes on, we do tribute interviews. And of course, I'm fond of doing tribute interviews. You know, when somebody has passed on, he's come on 2 years ago to do one on Lucille Ball, and it was my 100th episode, and shared all kinds of stories about her and I Love Lucy. And last year it was Ella Fitzgerald and his new book, Ella, which is out in bookstores now, and you can order that online as well. And we have him on again today, talking about Mary Tyler Moore, who we lost just recently. But boy, I remember her, you remember her, and my guest on the phone today remembers her as well. Folks, I give you Geoffrey Mark. How you do, Geoffrey?
I am wonderful. I am always happy to talk to my Canadian friends. I don't get to do it often enough.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, third time having you on here, you're very well spoken, and you've got such loads and loads of stories to share on these artists, and
Greg, you flatter me. Please don't stop.
Well, I've been looking forward to talking about Mary Tyler Moore, you know, because although when I was younger, I did not watch the Mary Tyler Moore Show, I did get acquainted with it later in life. And, of course, I'm very familiar with her and Ordinary People and some of her other movies that we're going to talk about. And I think I'm going to let you kind of wing it from here because you're much more better on the radio than me. So talk about your affiliation with Mary and the backstory here.
Well, first of all, I don't think there's anyone over a certain age. If you're at one age, you fell in love with Laura Petrie, the character she played on the Dick Van Dyke Show. And the story of how she came to that and how a talent blossomed out of what they thought was nothing is fascinating. If you're a little younger, you fell in love with her as Mary Richards on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. If you're younger than that, then it was her films and her TV movies you liked. There was something about Mary, and by the way, that's where that title comes from. People talking about Mary Tyler Moore. There's something about Mary that intrigued people, but men especially, from her very earliest times. Mary and I share something. We were both born in Brooklyn, New York, in the same neighborhood. She being a bit older than I am. She's my mother's age. But we had the same influences culturally. And if you watch the Dick Van Dyke Show, you can still hear the Brooklyn accent coming out in her. She hadn't quite gotten rid of it yet. Whereas on her own show, Mary Tyler Moore, she's strictly Midwestern and plays the character much more differently. But Mary wanted to be a dancer. And she had a troubled childhood. There was a lot of alcoholism in her family, and like many families, I think if you walk down the street of any town in your neighborhood, folks, wherever it is you're listening to this, and knock on doors and say, tell me about your family history, you're going to hear about people not getting along. You're going to hear about people's failed dreams. You're going to hear about alcoholism and drug addiction. You're going to hear some sexual secrets. I don't think her background is particularly special. It is the same as everybody else's in everybody's neighborhood. The special part is what she did with the talent. She was very pretty. She developed early, and she went to ballet school because she wanted to be a dancer. She also got married very early as a teenager, and had a child named Richie, which is why the kid on the Dick Van Dyke Show was named Richie. But Mary was found doing commercials. She was on the old Ozzie and Harriet show. For those of you who may remember, it was one of the big hits of the 1950s. Let's put it this way. It was on for 14 seasons. So it was a pretty big hit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of their sponsors was Hot Point. I don't know if Hot Point is still around, but they made refrigerators and dishwashers and ovens and kitchen appliances. And she was the happy Hot Point girl. And she danced around in this little elf costume, surrounded by animation, and she was, and next week, her voice was very high because she was still young, but she was already married and became pregnant while she was happy Hot Point, and they had to sort of hide her belly in the costume for a while, and then lost the job because she got too large to dance.
Wow.
And her next big gig, only parts of her showed, was on the Richard Diamond detective series. She played the girl who answered his phones, named Sam, and she used a very sultry voice. And all they showed were her legs, and you heard her voice. You never saw her face.
That's too bad.
You didn't see all of her until the movie X-15, where she has a small part, and she gets to do some mild acting in a mild film about rockets that was not a huge success. But she had auditioned for Danny Thomas. Danny Thomas had started out in life as a saloon comedian, had become a pretty big star, but didn't become really well known until he had his own sitcom called Make Room for Daddy. And from that, he took the money from that and began producing other shows with Sheldon Leonard. And Danny had a lot of turnover on his show as far as the actors went. Danny was not the easiest person in the world with whom to get along. And the young girl who played his daughter on the show, they didn't get along at some point. So he just replaced her. They wrote her out of the show. She's going away to finishing school. Well, they let the season go, and then they bring the character back, but not the actress. And Mary auditioned for that part. And Danny said she's fine, but no one's going to believe that that nose pointing to her came from this nose pointing to his, because Danny was Middle Eastern and had a large nose and did a lot of comedy about having a large nose. So she didn't get the job, but they produced a thing called The Dick Van Dyke Show. And when they called Rose Marie, my friend Rosie, and said, hey, we'd love you to be on the Dick Van Dyke Show, her answer was, what's a Dick Van Dyke? He was not a big star. He'd been on Broadway, he'd been in nightclubs, but outside of New York, nobody knew who he was. So they were taking chances. And they were looking for the girl to play his wife. The original concept was you wouldn't see her very often. The show was more about his life as a comedy writer, and Rose Marie was going to be the major woman as his female comedy writer partner. And they're casting, and Danny remembered her and said, what was the name of that girl with the 3 names? She could do this. And they brought her in, and just based on how she said the word hello when answering the phone, he thought she was such a natural. Now, you have to tell me, Greg, are our friends out there going to want to hear the official story, or are they going to want to hear a little gossip? Because I have both. At this point, the story changes depending on who's telling it, because I've heard the story told by about 7 different people. So you, the host, need to tell me what our friends out there want to hear.
Oh, man. You know what? I'll leave that up to you. Whatever you think is the most factual and what you believe.
All right. This is what I believe happened.
Okay.
Mary was a beautiful woman. She had a graceful, long-legged dancer's figure. Looks-wise, she had everything a woman needed to succeed in show business. Her only detriment was her hair wasn't very good. So most of what you saw of her on television, Mary was wearing wigs. On her own show, on Dick's show, they were wigs because her hair just didn't behave well. But in order to gain ground, and this is the business part of show business, that those of us who are in the business have learned to deal with. Someone got a hold of Mary and told her, you can push Rosemary out of the way and have them build more shows around you if you play up to the people who have power. The people who had power in this instance were Sheldon Leonard, who was the producer of the show, Danny Thomas, who was the producer of the show and the investor in the show, Dick Van Dyke, who was the star of the show, and Carl Reiner, who was the creator and the writer and sometime performer on the show. And I will say this as nicely as I can because I don't believe in vulgarities.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that Mary was as nice as she could be to all of the gentlemen I just mentioned to curry favor with them. Allow your imaginations to run wild with how nice she could be. Whatever that means to you folks who are listening, this is radio, so use your imaginations.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get specific. But they started writing episodes for her. And they wrote one where she thinks that Rob Petrie, Dick Van Dyke's character, has lost interest in her. And she and her next-door neighbor decide to bleach her hair blonde to stimulate his interest back into her. Now, this is 1961, folks. You know, that's the advice women got in those days. Change your hairstyle. Not like talk to your husband and work this out. All you have to do is look a little different, and he will be so romantic with you. Well, the script may be a little old-fashioned, but Mary was brilliant in it. See, if I tell you she used favors to get ahead but didn't have the talent, what a shame. She delivered. And I don't mean she delivered favors. I'm implying that. I'm telling you from a talent point of view. She delivered. She gave them everything they could have wanted and more. See? Nobody felt badly about this because she was right there working. And she did a funny crying jag. The only other person I've ever known to be that good at it and that successful at it was Lucille Ball.
Okay.
But Mary was not copying Lucy. She made it all herself. When they realized how funny Mary could be, Mary became the female lead of the show. And they kind of pushed Rosemary into the background. As time went on, Rosie did less and less on the show. Mary did more and more on the show, to the point where really it was the Dick Van Dyke Show starring Dick and Mary, and everybody else was a co-star. She always got last billing and Mary Tyler Moore. Because really, guys, in the beginning, they just thought she was going to be a pretty girl who said, "Hi, honey, I'm home," and kissed him. They didn't realize what they had. And once they found what they had, Carl Reiner and John Rich, the director, did their best to really teach Mary how to be funny, how to do a take, how to make a face, but how to do it seamlessly and how to do it in character. So in front of 40 million people, Mary Tyler Moore learned how to act and learned how to be funny, and they let her sing and they let her dance on the show because she already knew how to do that. And Mary became a big star from the Dick Van Dyke Show. She won, I think, 2 Emmy Awards playing Laura Petrie. She was a guest star on other people's variety shows and specials. And then she began making films for Universal Studios. Right around the time that Dick decided he no longer wanted to do the show after 5 seasons. The Dick Van Dyke Show is probably the best sitcom of the 1960s, and maybe in competition with I Love Lucy and maybe All in the Family and Seinfeld, the best sitcom ever done. Because everybody on the show, including Mary, was wonderfully, wonderfully talented. But backstage, there were problems. Dick drank too much. And if you watch the 5 seasons of the Dick Van Dyke Show, he seems to age like 10 years in that 5 years. By the last season, he's got bags under his eyes and his hair is turning white, and you can see something's going on. Well, unfortunately, Mary had the same problem. As Laura Petrie gets older, there's a problem. Both Dick and Mary, the two leads, were alcoholics. And the same is true on Mary's own show, which came next. Mary drank too much. And you can watch episodes of the Mary Tyler Moore Show and see the red eyes and the puffiness and the bags under her eyes. Something's not right here. She's aging way too fast. Now, I'm saying all of this, my friends, not to gossip, but I am a recovering alcoholic. April 1st of 2019 was 30 years of me being clean and sober. I understand the disease. I understand how difficult it is to overcome. And both Dick and Mary overcame it. They did both get sober. But while these shows were going on, they were drinking a lot. And it shows. And it shows. And it made them perhaps not as easy to deal with had they not been drinking. Everybody loved Dick. I've never heard a bad word said about Dick Van Dyke other than when someone saw him drunk. Mary didn't always make friends on the set. She was so driven to be the star, so driven to get center stage, that sometimes her relationships with other people, especially other females, didn't always go so well. She and Rose Marie were not friends. They were never friends. Rosie really disliked her and knew that she had to put up with it because that was the show, and Rosie wanted to be on the show, and Rose Marie was wonderful on the show when they gave her a chance. But she and Mary were never close, and that's why they never worked together again, except on the Dick Van Dyke reunion special in the early 2000s. Most of the people on the Dick Van Dyke show ended up being somewhere on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Mary, in the late 1960s, moved to New York. She made films, and they were not huge successes. The biggest film she made was Thoroughly Modern Millie with Julie Andrews.
Okay.
And then she played, and this is the one that really kind of sunk her career. She plays the nun that Elvis Presley falls in love with in his last film, Change of Habit. Now, does that description of that movie already tell you what a disaster it's going to be?
Yeah.
It is so awkward. It is so badly written. Elvis and Mary try very hard to play the characters. But how do you have a hip, great-looking young guy obviously sexually attracted to a nun, and then how does the nun play it that she's attracted back but? And this is a comedy. So the movie just died, and Mary's movie career died with it. Dick Van Dyke, being who he is, owed CBS a couple of specials. And he literally built a special around Mary. They called it Dick Van Dyke and the Other Woman. And he threw this special to Mary. I mean, if he wanted to go on television for an hour and just kiss her feet, he could not have done more to say, look, folks, this is a talented girl who should be in a show. The ratings went through the roof, and just based on that special, CBS gave Mary her own show. I'm giving you a little break to ask a question because this is a monologue so far.
Oh, I love that. You're very good at telling a story. I'll tell you that. Of her, excuse me, her films, I need to ask, what was, do you know what was like her working with Elvis Presley?
Professional.
Okay.
Elvis was not yet deep into drugs. Elvis was very bored with what he was doing. Colonel Parker, as some of you may know, his manager, completely controlled what Elvis did. He was no longer having big hit records, although he had some after this movie. But he'd stopped touring. He'd stopped long ago playing live. And his films had become cookie cutter.
Yeah.
One after another, always playing this very sexy, hip-shaking, but very nice guy. And there was always some pretty young girl all over him, and maybe some older person going tisk, tisk, tisk about how sexy he was. But this was a little different. He was a fan of Mary's. She wasn't 18 or 19. She was a little bit older at this point. And it gave him a chance to play something a little different. So he enjoyed the filmmaking process. But it was his last film. This film ruined both of them.
Wow. And what about her working with Julie Andrews? Talk about musicals. Julie could definitely keep up with her.
There was no competition there. Julie Andrews, who I know, is a beautiful, talented, very intelligent woman. And she is her own woman. She does not need to step on anybody else's toes. Her own talent, her own drive takes her wherever she wants to go. That's why the woman is in her middle 80s and we're still talking about how talented and beautiful she is.
Oh, absolutely.
Mary's part, I think, is what writers call underwritten. They didn't give her enough to do. She's there to be pretty and to dance with Julie. But as far as the plot goes, she really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the plot. The movie as a film is not great. It has wonderful music in it, and the musical numbers are wonderful. But the plot itself, they tried to do a pastiche of a 20s or 30s movie musical, and it just decided fails at that level. It was a little too winky at the audience.
Yeah.
Had they played straight, it might have been a better film. But instead, they did it kind of campy. And on that level, I think it fails. And maybe Mary was having a season of self-doubt because none of her films were working well. And the critics didn't really like her in Thoroughly Modern Millie. The movie was a big hit because of Julie and because the theme song to the movie was a big hit song. But Mary was not like, ooh, look at Mary Tyler Moore in this. She was kind of overlooked. So by the time of this TV special we're talking about, Dick Van Dyke and the Other Woman, Mary was afraid it was over for her. There were no more movie offers coming. She was ready to go back into television. Movie stardom had eluded her, as it does many people who get famous on television and think, okay, now I'm going to be a big movie star. The same thing happened to Dick, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Dick immediately signed to do a whole bunch of films. And yeah, he is brilliant in Mary Poppins.
Mm-hmm.
And had he done nothing but Mary Poppins, we'd still know who Dick Van Dyke is today. And he was brilliant in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. But the other films he did, there's one I like called Fitzwilly that no one remembers with Barbara Feldon, which is beautifully written and beautifully acted, and everyone in it is wonderful. But he did some films that were bombs, and Dick himself had to come back to television to really have a career. So sometimes the movie star thing just doesn't work out for people.
No.
It didn't work out for Mary, at least not yet. So CBS hires Mary, who is at this point married to Grant Tinker, to come up with something for herself. And what they came up with originally is that Mary was a young divorcee, 30 years old, who had been living in Minneapolis, or at least living in Minnesota, but was applying for a job at a news station, television news station, and it would be about life as a divorcee at 30 in the Midwest in 1970, and the people at work and the people at home. So very much like the Dick Van Dyke Show premise. Who does she interact with at work? Who does she interact with at home? And most of these people end up getting to know each other a little bit. But there were two separate kinds of casts. And they got to hire brilliant people, just like they did it for the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Asner as her boss. Ed Asner had played a cop in the film with Elvis Presley. So they'd already worked together once. Cloris Leachman had been around. She was a Miss America back in the 40s. Had been around a very long time. and a brilliant, crazy, brilliant actress.
Oh,
We're
she's
lucky to get her.
wonderful. Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah.
Nuts. I'm telling you, nuts. I love Cloris. We're friends, but, off the wall. But she brings that to her acting, and it's wonderful. Valerie Harper played Mary's best friend, Rhoda, and Valerie was not Jewish at all. In fact, she had a Middle Eastern background, but not Jewish Middle Eastern. She'd been doing improv and off-Broadway things, and they found her, and she was perfect. She played the Rhoda character perfectly. She gave Mary balance, somebody who wasn't as pretty, wasn't as pulled together, had more problems. And then the people at work and the people at home, the whole thing kind of worked. The set was great. The writing was brilliant. The direction was brilliant. That happens once in a while, where everybody is brilliant. And Mary was very fortunate to be surrounded by people who were brilliant. And then her husband was a wonderful businessman and immediately started making new shows. So eventually Rhoda got her own show, and Phyllis, the character Cloris Leachman played, got her own show, and Lou Grant, when the Mary Tyler Moore show went off, got his own series based on the same character. They made a lot of money, a lot of money. Mary was able to project Midwestern guarded warmth, Midwestern guarded Protestant values. We learn in the first episode that she's Presbyterian.
Okay.
Mary had lost every trace of her New York accent at this point and was talking with that sort of flat Midwestern accent. So anybody else around her brought ethnicity and quirkiness. Everybody else was quirky. Mary, and the character Mary Richards, wasn't. She was corn-fed, Midwestern, Protestant, pretty. What possible problems could she have? And Mary knew how to play getting overwhelmed. And for Mary, and for the character Mary, it could be that her hair wasn't fixed properly, or an ashtray was full, and she could overreact to that because her life was so organized. The other people bounced off walls around her and brought the comedy. She was, in her own way, a wonderful straight man for the comedian actors who worked around her. And the show was brilliant, and Mary won more awards. And by the late 1970s, Mary was considered, along with Lucille Ball and Carol Burnett, really one of the queens of TV comedy.
Mm-hmm.
She had completely vindicated herself. Everyone knew that Mary Tyler Moore was more than just a pretty face. This was a woman who knew how to act and how to be funny and could consistently do it week after week after week, and didn't need to prove herself anymore.
No.
But what she felt was missing in her life was the singing and dancing, because she did none of that on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. So when the Mary Tyler Moore Show ended, by the way, for those of you who are sticklers about this kind of thing, the show was never called the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The name of the show was Mary Tyler Moore. It's just easier to refer to the show that way because you don't know if I'm talking about the actress or the show. Aren't you glad I get so trivial? You can next time you guys have a trivia night at the bar wherever you go to, you tell them the name of the show was only Mary Tyler Moore. Have them buy you a beer. So remember, Geoffrey Mark said so.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so Mary decided she wanted to go into variety television. And I don't know of too many performers who bombed twice in the same season, but she had two variety shows back to back. Both of them bombed.
Wow.
One was a straight variety show, and she had wonderful people on it. She had Dick Shawn. She had early David Letterman, long before anybody knew who the hell he was. He was a weatherman, and she'd come across him, and in the same way that perhaps Mary charmed the people around her when she first got started, I have heard that David charmed Mary in the same way.
Okay.
But the cast of characters was wonderful. But the show died. They didn't make a well-made variety show. It didn't know what it was. So they went away and came back 2 or 3 months later with another variety show. And this time it was an hour-long kind of sitcom about people putting on a variety show. And she wasn't playing Mary Tyler Moore. She was playing Mary McKenna, a fictional variety show star. And the show was about her putting on the show every week, which gave her a chance to sing and dance, but also to play a character. What she felt, what Grant Tinker felt, was that she wasn't very successful playing Mary Tyler Moore. She had to play a character, a defined character, but had defined character traits. She could be wonderful at that. She wasn't good at just being Mary. That's what they decided. And this is the direction it went in, and it also folded. It folded just in time for Robert Redford to cast her in Ordinary People.
Yeah.
And there we go, back to the movies. Sometimes it is luck.
What I find fascinating with Ordinary People, number one, at the Oscars, it went head-to-head with Raging Bull, and both are great movies. But one of the things I'm going to say with Ordinary People, it's one of those few movies that you see where fatherhood is looking more sympathetic than motherhood. And that last shot in the movie, I think, is just priceless. A bond between a father and son. And, you've got a wife that cannot connect emotionally with the younger son after they lost the older son in a boating accident. And the older son was winning all these trophies, all these awards. And Timothy Hutton, who plays the younger son, is having so much trouble dealing with this. And wonderful scenes with Judd Hirsch as his therapist. And Donald Sutherland, as the father, is feeling everything fall apart around him. He's trying hard to be a father, but be a husband. And you see him one point there, he's jogging, and he just kind of just drops to the ground. Like he's just exhausted. His mind is thinking about this. And it had a profound effect on the Mary Tyler Moore character in the movie. And normally in a movie like this, it's the fathers that are villainized. And I'm not saying Mary's necessarily villainized in this.
Oh, go ahead and say that, because she is.
I suppose, yeah. But well, I love the...
It's very strange. And I knowing I was going to be on with you and our friends out there, I actually went and watched that film a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because, folks, our friend the Python here is such a popular host. He's booked up months in advance to get on this show. Believe me, I've known a long time I was going to be with you today. So I took the time to watch Ordinary People again, because I hadn't seen it since it first hit the theaters.
Oh, wow.
And, well, just sometimes you don't get to watch things over and over and over again. And the unusual, almost eerie connections between Mary's character, Beth, in Ordinary People, and what happened with her own son is very, very strange. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, either you haven't seen Ordinary People or you just don't know this about Mary. Mary had a son named Richie, which is why I said on the Dick Van Dyke Show their kid was named Richie.
Mm-hmm.
And she and her husband divorced so Mary could marry Grant Tinker, who could do a lot more for her career. And like many women who are in show business, the show had to come first. Richie was not given the time or the access to his mother that most teenage boys would want, because she was busy working and busy building an empire of other shows. So her relationship with her son was strained, not unlike Beth's relationship with the son who didn't die. And unfortunately, in real life, Mary's loss was that her son Richie was cleaning a rifle, and in cleaning it, the rifle went off, and he lost his life.
Oh.
And it sent Mary off, as well it should, full of grief over loss, full of grief over, oh, good heavens, all those opportunities I had to spend time with him, now there's no more time left. So she had a lot of remorse about that. And not long after that, Mary's brother was ill with cancer. Mary had remarried to a young doctor, much younger than she. She divorced Grant Tinker, and with her doctor husband, helped her brother to commit suicide because he couldn't handle the pain any longer. So there's a lot of ordinary people in Mary's life. It's just after the fact. So you watch the film and go, good heavens, how could anyone making this movie know this is what Mary Tyler Moore, the actress, would be going through in her personal life? So watching the film now, it's almost hard for me. I go, ooh, this must have been so hard for Mary.
Yeah.
People have lives. I will share something personal with our friends in Canada, and I'm not just kissing up to you people. My favorite people on the planet are Canadians. You're so much nicer than Americans. Really, you are. Whoever is training you to be nice people, I wish you'd come down here and train Americans to be as nice as you are. So I have great respect.
You need to put somebody in the White House that likes us.
No comment about that. I'm sure if I talk about Mary. But I will tell you that 3 weeks ago, I lost my soulmate of 47 years.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you, sir. Hey, the show must go on, and the person who passed would want me to keep going. I'm still alive. Trust me, folks, I'm not being cold. I cried my eyes out for 3 weeks. I fell apart like anybody else would who lost a partner, and now I have to go back to life. Part of my life is sharing stories with you folks and hopefully making you happy. So I'm here today, and this is where we are. My point being, loss. When you have loss like that, what do you do with it? How do you handle it? And somebody I know said to me, "You're such a strong person, Jeff, and you're famous. What problems could you possibly have?" And I looked at that person and said, I have every problem everybody else has, as does everybody else in show business. Being famous, or in my case, it's not true being wealthy. I'm not wealthy, but if you were wealthy, or being very good looking, but whatever people think of you, you have a life. And people get ill, and people die, and people have problems. And our celebrities, our big stars, our superstars, still have problems. Mary's personal life was difficult. 2 failed marriages, a son who died in an accident, a brother she had to help commit suicide, very strained relations with her parents, alcoholism she had to overcome. It is never, ever easy to be a woman in male-dominated show business. She had to advocate for herself. She had to push for herself. Not easy. It wasn't easy for Joan Crawford in the 1920s. It wasn't easy for Lucille Ball in the 50s. It wasn't easy for Mary Tyler Moore. And her career, like many people's careers, was a roller coaster. There are very few, Bob Hope, Jack Benny's, George Burns's, Milton Berle's, if those names mean anything to our friends out there, who never stopped being big stars. Their careers never waned. They were always beloved. Other people have career lulls. Mary had them. She did so wonderful in Ordinary People, she was nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah.
And yet it did not lead to a whole bunch of films. She did 2 more movies and 2 TV movies, and none of them were wildly successful the way Ordinary People was. And she came back to television. Another sitcom, this time just called Mary, and it is a foolish carbon copy of Mary Tyler Moore, the series. So instead of working in a newsroom, she's working on a newspaper. And all the same characters are there with different names and different actors playing them. And it was interesting to watch in that Mary is always interesting to watch. I've never seen Mary Tyler Moore be boring.
No.
No matter what is going on, she has that star quality that you want to watch her. But the series folded. It didn't last even half a season. And yet, 2 years later, she's in this wonderful mini-series playing Mary Todd Lincoln. And is praised to the skies for her acting ability, that she's playing a woman with mental illness and playing it beautifully. The critics just loved her in this. Up and down, up and down, up and down. That's how the rest of her career was, this roller coaster ride. I'm giving you a space again. Friends, Greg knows that I can talk for about 5 hours on almost any subject in show business. But I want to give you a chance if there are any questions you
know what? I'm fine with that. Just listen to you talk about it, but you tell it in very good story form. But yeah, I'll ask some questions. Let's take a step back here to Ordinary People.
Sure.
What made Robert Redford cast her in that? Like, what made him think to cast her in this movie?
Completely going against type.
Mm-hmm.
And she played Betty Rollin in a TV film 2 years earlier, well, I guess a year earlier, because the movie came out in 80, but was made in 1979. He'd seen her play a woman in pain. The film was really the first TV movie about someone with breast cancer who had a mastectomy. And he saw her being able to play someone who was strong but in pain. And he felt that Beth, the person she played in Ordinary People, at first, because of how the script is written, she's like Mary Richards. She's this waspy, Protestant-y, pretty woman with lots of money and a beautiful home, and her life is all organized and put together, very much like Mary Richards on the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Mm-hmm.
But then you begin to see the cracks. And that's really what the movie is, scene by scene, seeing the cracks in Beth's mask until she's who she really is. And Redford thought Mary could do that she could almost parody the character she'd been playing for so long and then take the mask off and show us a real person. And he was right.
Yeah.
Because Robert Redford's a very talented man, a talented director, a very intelligent man. Mary's an intelligent woman, or was, I should say. Mary was not dumb. There are, in show business, very talented actors and actresses who aren't that intelligent. Reading was not important to them. History was not important to them. Schooling was not important to them. Mary was not one of those people. She was intelligent, and she was able to bring intelligence to her characters. I never really ever saw Mary play dumb. Everyone she played had a mind, above and beyond her being pretty.
Yeah.
All the characters thought, which is very, very important. Because if a character isn't thinking, you really can't be acting. Then you're just kind of saying words and walking around. Her characters thought, and Beth and Ordinary People had to think, and then had to think about not thinking. Because the whole movie is about a woman in denial.
Yes.
Denial of what happened, denial of what she's feeling, denial of what's happening to the people around her, denial that she's a raving bitch to her family because she's hurting and won't admit it.
Yeah.
So it's just all these layers of thinking about not thinking, feeling, thinking about not feeling, and Mary pulled it off. That's not an easy acting exercise. It takes a real actress to do that, and Mary was. Like I said, I could mention people who didn't like her. I could mention people who thought she wasn't very supportive of them, or she pushed people aside for her own glory. That's perhaps part of who Mary Tyler Moore the person was. There was a much nicer side to who Mary Tyler Moore the person was as well. She was very supportive of young talent once she was established, did charity work, was there for people, could be a good friend. So, it's not all black and it's not all white, or it's not all green and it's not all blue. Mary, like every other human being on the planet, has multicolors, and it depends on who you are in her life and what year is it and what is your interaction and how does she know you. And that will inform what your relationship with Mary is. But I don't think there's anyone who can denigrate her talent.
No.
It's there. It's there. It's not just her being pretty, because there's lots of pretty people out there who never make it.
That's right. Well, it's interesting because she was nominated for an Oscar for Ordinary People. Now, she's won a lot of awards just from, Mary Tyler Moore Show and stuff like that. But here, as an Academy Award nomination, talk about her reaction to that. Probably pretty obvious.
Pretty obvious. She was very disappointed, but she didn't win. The movie did very well, but she did not win, and it's very difficult. I know this may sound like I'm speaking of a cliche, and I don't know if this is as true today as it was. We're going back to the late 1970s and early 1980s here, so quite a while ago, the beginning of my career. If you were a huge success on television, if you were stereotyped as a character or a kind of a character, it was very hard to break out of that. People just wouldn't hire you, irrespective of how successful or how beloved you would be. Carol Burnett tried to be a movie star. It didn't work for her. She made some good movies, but it never stuck. Lucille Ball. Has there ever been a bigger television star than Lucille Ball? Miss Ball made almost 70 films before I Love Lucy and was a huge movie star before I Love Lucy. But once she became the Lucy character for 23 seasons on television, playing one version of that character or another, it was very hard for her to get parts where she wasn't playing some version of that character. And when Miss Ball left her weekly series and tried to do a series of specials playing different characters and different types, the audience wouldn't have it. They wanted to see her as Lucy. And pretty much for Mary Tyler Moore, the audience wanted to see her either as Laura Petrie or as Mary Richards or some version of that.
Yeah.
And it hindered Mary's career. Now, if that happened to me, if I was lucky enough to get on a sitcom where I was the star or a co-star, I would say, thank you, God, let me be typecast and enjoy it. Mary wanted more. And unfortunately, except once in a while, she didn't get it. She didn't get to do what she really wanted to do. And there's another thing we need to talk about here, and it's concurrent with where we're going in the timeline, and we haven't discussed it at all. Mary had diabetes.
Oh, yes, that's right. Type 1.
Mary was diagnosed with the diabetes during the time of Mary Tyler Moore, the show. And Mary did not do what she should have done. She kept drinking, she kept smoking, she kept eating sugar. And in the 1980s, as the 80s decade went on, Mary began to have health problems. Her vision, the usual things, unfortunately, that happens with people who have diabetes who don't take it seriously at first. Vision problems, neuropathy in the feet, great gains and losses of weight. And so on top of getting older, on top of having a couple or 3 facelifts, which probably is not a good idea when you have diabetes. Unnecessary surgeries are not recommended because you don't heal right. So as she got past the failed TV sitcom Mary, as she got past playing Mary Todd Lincoln, she began having to also deal with health issues. And we can't not talk about that because it does inform the rest of her life. Perhaps it is why she married a doctor who was at least 20 years younger than she was, and good for her, you know. He was a very handsome young man, a wonderful doctor, and he seemed to bring her personal happiness. But Mary ages. You can see it, that she looks her age for the rest of her life. She wasn't able to carry off looking younger as she might have had she been really healthy.
Yeah.
But she tried television again. There was a series which I personally loved called Annie McGuire. And they do this all the time today. Back then it was something brand new, the dramedies. The half-hour comedies that had some drama with them, and they were not done in front of an audience, like Modern Family.
Yeah.
Today, Mary and her company kind of invented this Annie McGuire show. She was wonderful on it, but I think it was like 20 years before its time. The show is good. Eileen Heckart is on it, and she's wonderful in it. Mary's wonderful in it. And she's playing a woman of her own age. But the audiences just didn't take to it. And Mary does very little over the next 10 years between Annie McGuire and her next TV series. A few TV movies. She's, at award shows, and she hosts TV special things, but she's not working all that much. Mary moved to New York. She lived in New York in a lovely, lovely apartment with her doctor husband. And she tried TV one more time in the 90s in a thing called New York News. And all of these shows we're talking about, 13 weeks and off.
Wow.
Things got bad for Mary. Her health really, really was going downhill much earlier than they ever let it on to be. She did do Broadway. She did do things in New York. And everything she did, personally, she got rave notices. There was never a time when anyone said Mary's no good at this. But her health was keeping her from doing more. She and Valerie Harper reunited in 2000 for a TV movie called Mary and Rhoda. Well, what happened to these two characters, 25 years later?
Okay.
But Mary was having trouble walking. Mary was having trouble wearing high heels. They did a scene of Mary running through the streets, and it took them like 3 days to get it because she couldn't run for more than 10 seconds. The neuropathy in her legs. She just couldn't do it. She couldn't feel where the street was. She had no feeling in her legs. It was getting hard for her to memorize lines. She was having to read everything off of cue cards. That slowed stuff down. Getting up the energy to play Mary Richards again, to bring that same character to us. Valerie was able to bring Rhoda back pretty well. Mary was struggling to bring us Mary Richards. And although the movie got great ratings because so many fans wanted to see these two ladies play those two characters again, none of the other characters from the original show were involved. It was just Mary and Rhoda and a whole bunch of new people. And in fact, they even rewrote one scene from the failed Mary sitcom, word for word, and used it in Mary and Rhoda because they thought nobody had seen the other one. It's hard. It was hard for Lucille Ball to revisit the Lucy character when time went by.
Mm-hmm.
Those of you who are Lucy fans may know that Miss Ball did Life with Lucy in the 80s, trying to do the Lucy character again. And there is no one more brilliant than Lucille Ball. But she really couldn't do it. It had been too long. She had gotten too old. It had been too long between drinks. And I think the same thing was true for Mary. I don't mean alcoholic drinks. I mean too long between trips to the well to get a drink and play the same character. And you can't write the character the same way. The actresses are older. They're not frozen in time. Neither are we. So it was a disappointment. Probably one of the few times Mary got not so great reviews, but the ratings went through the roof. She continued to do TV movies when she could. And there was a Dick Van Dyke Show reunion in 2004 where she played Laura Petrie again. And quite frankly, between you and me, she didn't play Laura Petrie. Either she'd forgotten or was just too ill to reach in and bring out Laura. But we weren't seeing the character. I don't know if I'm saying this properly. Mm-hmm. We weren't seeing the character of Laura Petrie. We saw Mary Tyler Moore saying funny lines and looking beautiful, but her interactions with the other characters and the way she said things weren't Laura Petrie. She wasn't recreating the character. And that was a disappointment to a lot of people who saw the show and said, wow, everybody else is able to bring what they were, at least the characters' attitudes. Mary couldn't do it. And I talked to Carl Reiner about it. And the joke was, while they were rehearsing this show, the most often repeated word was, what? Because everybody was wearing hearing aids. Mary was, Dick was, Rosemarie was, Jerry Van Dyke was, and Gilbert was. No one could hear anything. Everyone had aged, Mary being the youngest of everybody in the show. But I came up with an idea for Carl, how they could do another retrospective show, and Carl said, it's over. We can't. The actors are just too old to do this anymore. It's too bad they didn't do this 10 years earlier. It might have been a wonderful reunion show for all of them involved.
Yeah.
It kind of just missed. And again, they had to shoot around Mary's ill health, as they had to shoot around Rosemarie's ill health. My dear friend Rosie was already in a wheelchair when this show was being done, and they got her to walk 3 steps to a counter and kind of grab onto it. The rest of the show, she's just seated, so you don't see her moving. And it's a shame. You know, they could have written the wheelchair into the show. They could have made jokes about it. They chose not to. It has to be in the writing. It always has to be on the page for the actress to play it properly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what started to be missing from Mary's performances, is she just didn't have the health. She didn't have the concentration. She was taking a great deal of medication. Mary did get sober. And let's in case anyone missed my saying that earlier. Mary did conquer her alcoholism, and God bless her for that. But her health was just in this decline. Even the very last things she did 2 episodes of Hot in Cleveland.
Yeah.
With Betty White, because she and Betty were such good friends, and we should probably talk about that friendship.
Mm-hmm.
But she was a guest on Hot in Cleveland. If you watch the episodes, Mary is seated the whole time. Mary couldn't walk anymore, and Mary could hardly see anymore. And it's the last acting she did because they couldn't shoot around it. If you have an actress who can't walk and can't see, it's very hard for them to relate to anybody else. And Mary couldn't see the cue cards, and she couldn't learn the words. It was sad. It was lovely of the people of Hot in Cleveland to go to that much trouble to get her on the air, but they couldn't do it more than a couple of times. It just became where Mary was heading into Alzheimer's, and it's a shame that someone so well known for being beautiful, known for being high energy, when ill health hits, it's very, very sad. It's sad no matter who the person is, but maybe it's sadder when it happens to our heroes. And I know she was a hero to you. She was certainly a hero to me and to our friends out there. Mary was loved.
Yeah.
Because of Laura Petrie, Mary Richards, and the film Ordinary People.
Yeah. I was going to talk a little bit about, and it's getting dark, but her death. You know, she passed away in...
last 2 years ago.
Yeah, I guess I don't have it on the right page here on... Okay.
January 25th, 2017.
Okay. Yeah, I got it on her filmography, so... yeah. I remember when she passed away, you know, and I know I was at a friend's house and we were watching a bunch of episodes of Mary Tyler Moore Show and whatnot. Talk about... I know this was very recent, only 2 years, but talk about her death and circumstances surrounding that.
There's nothing terribly dramatic there to tell. We who are in the business, we who either knew her personally or knew people who knew her, knew it was coming. This was not like she just dropped dead one day or had a heart attack, or this was years in coming. We were surprised that she was able to do Hot in Cleveland because we knew she was ill. We knew that while Valerie Harper was busy, and as of this phone call still alive, and busy battling brain cancer, that Mary was really having a hard time. She showed up for Betty White's 90th birthday, I believe, but... They couldn't show her getting up and getting down because she couldn't walk, and she looked just old and skinny and bony, and it was sad. It was like, Mary, you should have stayed off the stage at this point. Like I said earlier, there are people, and I think it's just dumb luck. The Bob Hopes, the George Burnses, maybe it's easier for men. Helen Hayes, Ethel Merman, who are able to perform, who are able to be in front of the public until the very end. Maybe the last year or so, they can't any longer. And I wish for all of my friends out there who are listening to us talk today that your life goes the same way. Whatever it is that you love doing in life, you get to do it almost right to the end. And I hope you get to live to be in your 90s and 100s. But not everybody gets the chance to do that. Mary was sick for a very long time. And I'd say the 5 or 10 years before she passed away, people were like, this could be any time now. It all depends on how fast the diabetes goes south. But it was already going south. It was already affecting her memory. She was blind. couldn't walk for a while. So it's very sad what happened to her. And our friends out there who are battling diabetes, what can we do but say to you folks, would you please see your doctor? Would you please take your insulin properly? Will you please stop eating sugar and drinking alcohol and smoking? Because you can live a nice, long, happy, productive life if you do all the right things as soon as possible. If you don't, if you put it off, what happened to Mary could happen to you. It happened to Ella Fitzgerald. We talked about this when I was on talking about my book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Ella kept working despite losing toes, despite not being able to stand up properly. And had Ella taken her diabetes seriously when she first got it, perhaps she would have lived longer, and perhaps she wouldn't have had to fight illness so long. And then there's a third thing about diabetes and show business. Why do people feel the need they must perform till they drop dead? Everybody else in every other profession retires at some point.
Yep.
Except in show business. And I'm as guilty of this as everybody else. We feel we must keep performing and writing, whatever we do, until they close the box on us. Like it's somehow our right to do that. I don't know exactly why Mary continued to be in the public eye, why she didn't withdraw and just live a full, happy life. She had tons of money, a handsome, handsome young husband who adored her, good friends, animal activism. She could have put her energies into that. I don't know why she chose to keep putting herself out in the public eye when she wasn't looking well, feeling well, or performing well. Ella did the same thing. Her doctors told her, you know, you're going to drop dead if you keep doing this. Ella's remark was, I could drop dead on the toilet. I'd rather drop dead on stage. And maybe that's how Mary felt too, that her whole life had been this career, and she wasn't going to give it up. I don't know what I would do faced with those kinds of circumstances. I'm 60 years old, and I'm still at this. And certainly I could just say, you know what, 45 years is long enough of a career. It's time to do charity work. I keep doing it. I love it.
Yeah.
I can't see myself doing anything else. But I don't have diabetes. I have other things, but not diabetes. I don't know what I would do if I were faced having to make the same decisions Mary did.
Yeah, looking at the Wikipedia page, and I forgot about this, she lost the Best Actress Oscar to Sissy Spacek for Coal Miner's Daughter. I gotta say that I, as good as she was in Ordinary People, I could not see anybody beating out Sissy Spacek in that role anyway. So it's not like she lost to somebody that was undeserving.
No.
So, yeah.
And there are many, many actresses through the years. How many times was Bette Davis nominated for an Oscar and should have won? But she was nominated in a year where there were other wonderful performances. Some years, the winner is obvious. They're the absolute best of the best, and everybody else just falls below the bar. Mary's year, maybe, without having the list of Academy Awards right in front of me, had she been nominated a year before or a year after, she might have won. Same part, same performance. She just happened to be up against extraordinary competition. There's always been this thing in Hollywood, you know, the Academy Awards, are they really fair? And shouldn't there be separate awards for comedy and drama? And shouldn't there be better descriptions of what it means to be a leading actress? Because there are some people, like, was she really the leading actress in the film, or was she a supporting actress in the film?
Good question.
Well, and we don't have good answers for that because the Academy Awards categories change from year to year and aren't specific enough. You know, the Golden Globes are more specific. And the Emmys, some years, the category names have been absolutely wild, putting people in completely different categories in competition with one another. so winning awards and being both a winner and a nominee myself of awards, it's a throw of the dice. I was nominated for a Grammy Award for something. I felt I was much more deserving of it for something else I did where I wasn't nominated. It's just the luck of the draw, and you just say thank you, thank you, thank you for being nominated or for being a winner, that anyone thinks you're that good. I don't think it impaired Mary's career not winning. There are plenty of people who win Oscars and still have trouble getting hired.
Yeah.
In fact, they call it the Oscar curse. How many people have won Oscars, and that was it. They hit their high mark with the Oscar, and everything after that was an afterthought. It's Irving Berlin, when he wrote "There's no business like show business," there really is no other business like that. As you well know, because of what you do, obviously you and I are in show business. Our friends listening mostly are not. In any other business, you go to certain schools, you gain certain skills, you put your time in, you advance up the ladder, and you can, if you're a hard worker who knows what they're doing, is dedicated to their job, and shows up and suits up, you know that at 65 you can retire having led a full life with so much money. None of that exists in show business. We go from project to project. Months or years can go by between significant income. And we can be hot as a fire this year and cold as ice the next year. And there's no reason or rationale for it. It's why many of us go gray very early in show business. It's a tough business to be in. When I talked earlier in our conversation about what Mary did to get ahead, giving favors to the men around her, marrying someone who could further her career, I'm not putting her down. I'm not saying what an awful person Mary was for doing these things. There's no judgment involved here. I'm telling you what happened, but I understand why it happened. Because being in a business that is so fickle and even harder for a woman, and especially 50 years ago for a woman to do it, you had to do whatever you had to do to get ahead. And I think if we scratched the surface of any of the golden age of show business actresses, names our baby boomer friends might know, names our millennial friends probably don't know. But the Joan Crawfords and Betty Davises and Myrna Loys, and go on and Esther Williams and all the folks into the 60s, including even the very, very, very famous Jane Fondas, they all had to do what they had to do to break through. It was really, really hard. Even with Jane having a very famous father, it was very, very hard. And nobody is handed anything. Because even if you don't have the talent and the experience to back it up, you may get one chance, but you're not going to get a second chance. Mary had the goods. Mary could sing, Mary could dance, she was funny as hell, and she could deliver. Well, that's what makes a star.
Yeah.
And she had that ephemeral something, that star quality something that no one has been able to define, but it means that when you're on a stage in front of an audience, or in a nightclub in front of an audience, or in front of a camera, you can't take your eyes off that person. My friend Carol Channing, who just died, was like that. When Carol was on a stage, there could be 100 people on the stage. It didn't matter who else was there. You only saw Carol. You only saw Ethel Merman. If you're in a nightclub, you only saw Frank Sinatra. 8 other people could be there. It didn't matter. You only saw Sinatra. You only saw Lucille Ball on a sitcom set. Mary was like that. You couldn't help not looking at her no matter who else was there. She had star quality. And you can't buy it. You can't invent it. It's either there or it isn't. She had it.
I'm just looking on here, the statue that they made of Mary.
Minneapolis?
Yeah, the one where she's tossing the hat, and that's a great image. And of course, it's one that everybody has of Mary.
Isn't it amazing what was 3 seconds of film that was never meant to be anything in particular?
Just like
all
Marilyn
these guys
Monroe
were doing-
with the skirt coming up, it's
All these people were doing was they went to Minneapolis, Minnesota with Mary to do what's called B-roll. Stuff that wouldn't be in the show, but stuff that they could use to show her going from here to there. To show a marking of time, to show her going to work, stuff that they could, written by, produced by, directed by stuff in the background. They decided to use some of this to do the show open, which is, the credits and the song and everything. No one said, "Oh, Mary, toss your head up in the air. This is going to be iconic." It was something they did to fill time. But for some reason, we, the audience, grabbed onto that and loved it. Loved it so much that when Valerie Harper did Rhoda, she mimics Mary doing it, except she can't catch the hat, which is supposed to tell you about the character, that she's not Miss Perfect the way Mary Tyler Moore was. But we all remember it.
What did Mary think?
Anyone who's ever seen the show remembers that.
Yeah. Well, what did Mary think of having the statue?
Honored.
Yeah.
I don't think that Mary played the diva or was ungrateful for her stardom. She was aware that she beat a lot of odds to become Mary Tyler Moore. Mary Moore in Flatbush, Brooklyn, you know what I mean? That girl couldn't have known what would happen to her. So I think Mary the person was very aware of how lucky she was, very aware of how hard she worked to get where she was, and perhaps what she had to give up in her personal life to get what she wanted. But I think any honor she got, I think any accolade, the audience's love, I don't think Mary took that for granted. Mary has been accused of being cold. Mary has been accused of being very competitive, especially with her other female actresses, with whomever she's working. Mary has been accused of being superficial. I never worked with her, but I know just about everybody who did work with her. And it really depended upon who you were in her life and what you were doing with her. Her directors loved her because she was willing, within reason, to do anything to make the thing funny. Her writers liked her because they knew that she would deliver, that they could write something funny, and because she was a talented woman, she could make it even funnier in the way that she said it. Because they're saying a funny thing, and then they're saying a thing funny. And she was able to do both. Her co-stars, some of them adored her, and some of them didn't. Through the years, through all the films and the television series, she became friends with some and wasn't so close with others. But they all had respect for her, so that in public you never heard. Now, I'm not saying any of the following people said negative things to me, but you never heard Betty White or Georgia Engel or Cloris Leachman or Valerie Harper or Ed Asner or Dick Van Dyke saying anything about her publicly that was negative. Now, privately, we all talk about our friends and their peccadillos and problems we have with working. You know, Dick was the first to admit that he was having an alcohol problem, and so was Mary. Dick admits that he and Mary were attracted to one another.
Mm-hmm.
It is rumored that they were also having an affair while the show was going on, even though they were married to other people. Can I prove that? I was not a fly in their bedroom, and I don't think it's all that interesting. I don't think anybody's sex life is all that interesting.
Oh, no, that's true, yeah. Tabloids like it, but I don't care for it either.
Unless somebody's going to have sex with me, then I care.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm not going to be in the room, I really don't care what other people do or don't do. There's been nothing new and invented in the bedroom in thousands of years, and none of it is all that fascinating unless I'm doing it with them. Mary was a human being. And when I talk about successful people, first of all, that she was successful, she earns my respect. She was hardworking. She earns my respect. Talent is something you're given. You're born with it. You know, I was born with hazel eyes and strawberry blonde hair. I was born with that, and whatever talents I have. But what she did with her talent and how she developed it, I'm an enormous admirer of her. Am I an admirer of Mary Tyler Moore, the person? From what I've heard, having never met her myself, but having met just about everybody who ever worked with her, I don't know that I would have liked her. I also don't know that I would have disliked her. I am someone who kind of wears his heart on his sleeve. There are very, very few secrets in my life. I'm almost completely unblackmailable because I'll talk about anything. Mary was a lot closer to the bone with stuff, closer to the vest, as they say. She didn't share easily. She kept distance from people. You had to earn her trust. I don't know if I would have earned her trust. I don't know if I would have even tried. But that doesn't mean I can't greatly admire what she accomplished for herself and admire an incredible body of work.
Another notable film that she was part of, that aside from Ordinary People, she of course was in Flirting with Disaster. That was directed by David O. Russell, who I think is a very skilled director. But I'll tell you, and I'm one of those people, I actually liked I Heart Huckabees, but everybody knows the story where he got into this heated shouting match with Lily Tomlin, and stories about he and George Clooney on the set of Three Kings. So we got Mary Tyler Moore in a David O. Russell movie. Do you know anything about her with this film?
It was a little bit of a come down for her in that she's not the female star. She's basically playing a glamorized character actress. Mm-hmm. She's now reached an age where the film is about the younger people, and she and George Segal and Alan Alda and Lily Tomlin, I mean, what a cast we're talking about here, are not the central focus of the film. I think she wanted to do the film because of George and Alan and Lily. I mean, I'd love to work with them too. Mm-hmm. They're brilliantly funny people. And Patricia Arquette is brilliantly funny. And Téa Leoni has talent. Ben Stiller, I will not talk about Ben Stiller if it's okay with you.
That's all right.
Not my favorite person, not my favorite actor. But a chance to be in an ensemble like this, I think any actor who has a brain wants to be a part of it. And I think she was happy to be a part of it.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, it's got a great cast in it. I know that was a film that got some recognition. And she had some...
Like I said, Mary was a very intelligent lady.
Yeah.
So when she saw opportunities, when Mary saw opportunity knock, she always answered the door. I don't think she had, like I said, she wasn't a diva. Once a show doesn't have her name on it, or once she realizes that the film is not starring Mary, it's starring thus and such and so and him and her with, and then she's in a list of very famous people that are with, she understands that it's not all about her, but she's happy to bring her talent to the project.
Yeah. I want to go back and talk about some of the films that Mary was involved in that we haven't talked about. Like, she got a couple from the 60s we haven't talked about. Like, What's So Bad About Feeling Good with George Papard.
Mary, as I said, got a contract with Universal Studios to make films.
Mm-hmm.
This is the tail end of the studios producing their own films and then putting actors and directors and writers under contract where you make as many films a year as they tell you to make, but you get paid a weekly salary. So Mary was a Universal star. Universal was probably the last studio to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And What's So Bad About Feeling Good? I enjoyed the film. I am not personally a huge George Papard film. He is someone who I felt incredibly easy on the eyes,
Mm-hmm.
but did not have much range as far as what he could play. But look at the other people in this film besides Mary. Don Stroud, who was equally easy on the eyes, but could play anything. The man had such range in his acting. My dear friend Don DeLuise is in this. Susan St. James is in this. Nathaniel Fry is in this. John McMartin, who could play anything and did on Broadway, in films, on television. I mean, we're talking about Charles Lane, Thelma Ritter. There are so many people here who are so good. I enjoyed the film, but it didn't really make money. It wasn't a Bombosaurus, but it did not become the big hit Universal had thought it would be. And Mary doesn't look good in it. And I don't know if whoever did her makeup and hair for this, and I could probably look it up in a second, just wasn't the right person for her. But she didn't look good in it. I don't think it was the right part for her. And we're talking about if you don't have a good script and the script is not a good idea, you're going to have problems. What's so bad about Feeling Good? Its story is there is an infection that goes from person to person that makes them happy. It is usually spread by being kissed. Now, I don't know about you, but I cannot imagine 90 minutes about that subject. That sounds like a very funny sketch for the Carol Burnett Show or Saturday Night Live.
Well, I'll tell you, being kissed by Mary Tyler Moore or Susan St. James, I mean, that wouldn't be bad.
It would not, and for our lady friends out there, you would have loved being kissed by Don Stroud or George Papard. But it doesn't hold up. There is, from a writer's point of view, something that's called being premise heavy. The premise of what we're talking about is so limited that it doesn't allow the writing to do very much. Usually, we talk about that with a sitcom. For instance, The Brady Bunch. If I may go onto a side here for a moment, and you'll understand why I'm going there.
Yeah.
My friend Sherwood Schwartz does this sitcom, and it is a ripoff of a Lucille Ball film about two families with kids coming together and getting blended.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought it would be a good thing to bring to television, and it was. except they did about 8 episodes and realized they'd run out of really funny ideas about bringing two families together. When it comes back for its second season, they never again even mention that the 6 children had a different mother and a different father from long ago, or that they weren't all blood brothers, blood sisters. The show became a show about an upper-middle-class family in Santa Monica and the trials and tribulations that 6 children have growing up in upper-middle-class suburbia in the early 70s. That became the premise. If they had stuck to the original thought of the blended families, it would have failed. And I think in this case, with what's so bad about Feeling Good, the movie was premise heavy, and the writing wasn't strong enough to take it beyond the premise. They just kept repeating the same joke. So the characters weren't fleshed out. You couldn't do much with it. No matter how good you are at acting, if it isn't on the page, there's not much the actor or the director can do with it, which is why writers are so wonderful and necessary, and great actors kiss the feet of great writers because they understand if it's not on the page, I don't get to say it. This film is charming, and Mary has good chemistry with George, and Mary is good in what she's given to do. It's just that she's not given the right things to do.
What about Don't Just Stand There?
It didn't play well at the box office. It didn't, and it's funny because we've got the same thing happening here, and maybe Universal Studios just didn't know what to do with her, which happens. MGM got Lucille Ball and didn't know what to do with her. She did much better at other studios. She's got good co-stars. R.J. Wagner, I know there's a lot of gossip about him, but from my point of view and what I know about him personally, one of the nicest human beings walking the face of the earth. Mm-hmm. My friend Harvey Korman is in it. Wonderful Glynis Johns is in it. Stuart Margolin, who would be on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, is in it. But, it's very specific. And it's about writers and a sex novel, and there's just, if you would read the promotions for it, if you'd read the synopsis of what it's about, I wouldn't go to see that movie. And then unfortunately, it's, in 1968, the novel was a lot spicier that it came from than the movie could be. They had to sort of water it down because the rating system was just beginning to happen.
Yeah.
Where they gave ratings to films. And Mary is known for a family-friendly fare. This kind of film was not for kids. But they couldn't make it interesting enough for adults. So again, all the Universal films Mary's making, they don't use her well. They don't take what she does best, which is reactional comedy. Mary reacting to something very unusual happening around her. Mary is wonderful at that. These films, the parts Mary plays in them could have been played by anybody.
Yeah.
These aren't Mary Tyler Moore films. This is Mary Tyler Moore in a film. Jill St. John could have played the part in Don't Just Stand There, and you wouldn't know the difference.
Well,
if it's that easy to replace someone, it's not the right film for them. And that was Mary's problem with all of these early films. Anyone could have played these parts. They weren't Mary parts.
Well, after she did Ordinary People, she went on and she did 6 weeks with where she got to work with Dudley Moore.
And that was a successful film. But there's a 2-year gap between them.
Mm-hmm.
Ordinary People didn't just have this effect of, okay, 100 scripts have now come in for Mary because of Ordinary People. It didn't happen. And Ordinary People probably happened a little too late in Mary's career. Mary is now, in her 40s and looking like she's in her 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Had the success of Ordinary People happened to her in her 20s, ageism is a real thing in show business. Still is today. For every Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin who get to do a sitcom on cable, there's all these wonderful women out there not working who are still pretty and funny and capable. But everybody writes for 20-somethings because they believe that's where the money is.
Yeah.
Right? Write stuff for young people, because young people are the ones they think who are going to the movies or downloading these films or buying DVDs, if anyone is still buying a DVD, not realizing it's usually the older people who have the dough to do these things. Hollywood is always skewed young. Very rarely do older people, and again, women, you have men like Bill Holden or Robert Redford or any of our big leading men into their 60s, they're still playing romantic leads with younger actresses less than half their age. When women hit their 40s, it's like nobody wants to see them be romantic anymore. Nobody wants to see them at all. Let's get in some hot young chick with great big breasts who wiggles when she walks, and all the young guys are going to want to go see the film. So older women fight to get good parts.
Yeah. Of course, it's been like that since forever,
If someone like Bette Davis, perhaps the greatest film actress there ever was having trouble getting work from time to time, was having to take inferior parts from time to time, took television roles just to make money to feed her children, that should tell you, if it was hard for Bette Davis, it's hard for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, looking at some other credits here, she did Just Between Friends, where she's listed as having a starring role. Now, I don't know this film, but Ted Danson's in it, Sam Waterston.
It was, again, it was written for her. It was written by somebody who had been one of the creators of the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Mm-hmm.
So this was written with Mary in mind, which is how she got the part. Because somebody who knew what she could do put her into something. And there were people in the film Mary had worked with previously who she knew. It gave her a comfort, and it gave her the range to do what she could do. So on a critical level, this movie did very well. She really, really, really shows us that Mary still has it. But for those of you who know what things cost, the movie only made like $7 million. It wasn't a big hit, and it was co-produced by Mary's own company. Mary is wonderful in it, but the film itself, critically, did not do well, and the audiences did not run to the theaters to see it. Even in retrospect, it is not a well-remembered film, but not because of Mary. The writing isn't all there, even though it's Alan Burns doing the writing and the directing. The focus isn't good. but Mary is wonderful in it. And Alan protected her. You know, you need to do that. When you're a big star and you want to do your best work, you've got to have writers and directors who will protect you, who write to your strengths, who help you be the best you can be in whatever the part is. When you have that, usually the film is a lot more successful. But the writing in this seems to not be top-notch. But I think Mary's wonderful in it.
Yeah, and she had another couple of films as well, Cheats, which actually, again, I never heard of that. I'm just looking on here. And her last film, Against the Current, that Joseph Fiennes in it, and Michelle Trachtenberg. Yeah, I don't...
It is, again, if you understand what's going on here,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's really has a small part in this film.
Yeah.
It is almost at this point stunt casting.
Yeah.
It is, oh, look, it's Mary kind of thing. It's kind of like on Titanic, which is this huge blockbuster movie.
Yeah.
And when the boat is going down, all of a sudden, Bernard Fox shows up, who played Dr. Bombay on Bewitched. And you can hear, I saw the film a lot. I loved Titanic. I saw it like 15, 20 times in the theater. Every time his face came up, the audience would applaud or laugh, or it's stunt casting. Recognizing someone the audience loves in a part that isn't very large necessarily, but, oh, look who's there. And that was Mary in this film. Oh, look who's there.
Yeah.
She's the mother of, like, the third billed woman. She's not even the mother of the first billed woman.
Yeah, so Mary, I think, found a lot of her major success in, of course, television. I think that's pretty obvious. Yeah, a couple of like Ordinary People Flirting with Disaster, which were very notable films. But yeah, balance in personal life and professional life, of course, obviously a big problem. That's a big problem with a lot of performers, especially when you're in the spotlight anyway. How did Mary... Mom was trying to avoid sounding naive saying this. I was going to say ask her how she handled this, but she did embrace the professional part. But how did she handle when she was not on the set of a movie?
How did she handle the lulls in her career as she got older? If that's your question, her health. The lulls are as much about her health not being good as it is about her not being a viable candidate for roles because of her age, and she did not look well. You know, Jane Fonda is 81 years old, and yeah, we can tell she's had lots of work done, and yeah, when she talks, we can see the plastic cheekbones moving, but she looks stunningly beautiful at 81. Joan Rivers looked stunningly beautiful at 80. Mary looked like an old lady.
Yeah.
And it bothered her. She knew she was not the glamour girl she had been. She, like many women, were concerned about letting her fans down, having them see her in a light that would kind of ruin her image. And quite often, you know, the last 15 years of her life, it was about her not being well enough to do this stuff. So you have a combination of what does come her way isn't really what she wants to do, and when she has the health and the energy to do something that she does want to do, it isn't there. And if something wonderful comes, she's not feeling well. I'm sure it hurt her. I'm sure that it disappointed her greatly. I'm sure it frustrated her. Mary, like many people in show business, tremendously motivated, tremendously ambitious person. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I am turned on by ambitious people. I am turned on by people who want to accomplish something.
Yeah.
That excites me, both as a performer or as a writer or anything else I might do in the business, to see someone else. I don't know if you get this because you're so well known, but I get a lot of young people asking me for help. Like, how did you break through, and how can I break through? And the first thing I look at is, all right, they have a desire, but do they have the burning ambition? Even before the talent, do they have the burning ambition? Mary Tyler Moore had the burning ambition, and I must assume that it made her very sad not to be able to take that ambition and do something with it as she aged and got ill.
Talk about her charity work.
Well, her two main charities were, of course, Diabetes Foundation and Animal Projects. She was an activist for animals, and I'm grateful for that. I've been lucky enough to know Betty White and to know Tippi Hedren and to know Joanne Worley and to be a part of Actors and Others for Animals, Doris Day's charity, and Jackie Joseph. These wonderful women who really, really, really have made a difference in how we think about animals and taking care of animals. And Mary was certainly a part of that. And the honesty she had with allowing people to know that she had diabetes. You know, she could have kept her mouth shut. No one really needed to know that she had diabetes. Nobody needed to know that she was an alcoholic who had overcome it. She went public with these things to try and help other people. So again, do we have some people saying she's cold and shallow? Yes, we do. On the other hand, we have this woman who is allowing us a peek at her personal life because it might help somebody else. It goes back to what I said earlier. Who are you in her life? What is it that you want? And if you're looking to help people and she can be a part of that, she could open up. If you're looking to use her, you're out of luck.
She's also an author as well. She did 2 memoirs,
which are very well written and very enjoyable. I don't know that she, and I'll say this, almost everyone's memoirs. People don't tell the truth, the whole truth. They certainly leave out things that might put them in a bad light, or might harm someone needlessly. So there were things that I know happened in Mary's life that aren't in the books, or the way they're told in the books aren't exactly the way they happened. And that's okay. This is what she chose to share with her fans. And who am I to say she should have shared something differently? But they're good reads. Those of you who loved Mary and you have not read her books, read them because you will enjoy them. Read Dick Van Dyke's book. Read Rose Marie's book. You're going to get 3 completely different versions of the same events. And I find that both interesting and amusing.
Absolutely. Well, of course, one book we got After All, and which she acknowledged that she was recovering alcoholic. And the other, Growing Up Again, Lifelongs and the Oh Yeah Diabetes, where she focused on living on with type 1 diabetes. Yeah.
It was hard for her. You know, any dancer is basically an athlete.
Yeah.
And dancers and athletes, you'd think they eat really healthy. Not necessarily. A lot of caffeine, a lot of sugar for energy, a lot of carbs for energy, which are completely counterindicated when you have diabetes. And very difficult when someone finds out in adulthood that they have diabetes to just put on the brakes and completely change your life. So Mary didn't do that. She kind of let it go for a while. I said that a little bit earlier, but I understand why. When you're used to having a body that does what you tell it to do, and all of a sudden it doesn't, that's very, very difficult. A very difficult transition to make. And if there are other things going on in your personal life at the same time, maybe that gets pushed aside for a while.
Yeah,
Mary had a lot of tough breaks in her personal life.
Yeah.
The home life was rocky and rough and sad. I'm not saying she didn't have happy moments. I'm not saying she was a morose woman. I'm saying she had a lot of difficulties, a lot of awful things happen in her childhood, a lot of difficulties in her marriages, difficulties and incredible heartbreak with her son, and then this illness that she had to deal with for 30 years or more. Hard stuff. Mary's life was not easy.
No.
She had to find her personal happiness while riding this incredible roller coaster ride in her personal life, like many other people have to. I would say, not that anyone cares about my personal life, but I've had to do the same thing. I've had some really hard knocks in my life, and what do? You try and find what makes you happy. You try and find moments of joy. I can't say I wish I could. I've had a joyous life, but I've had a contented life. I'm a very grateful man. I can't imagine Mary wasn't grateful for all that she could accomplish, grateful for the ability to take what God gave her and become so famous doing that. And I'm certain that she was grateful for all of you out here who are listening to us talk about her, who loved her work, who loved Laura Petrie, who loved Mary Richards, who are still watching these shows and laughing, and the joy that brought. I know she was very grateful for that.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, I mentioned earlier, I think this was even before we went live on here, I mentioned, I don't know whether Ted Knight was the first one to pass away from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Was he?
Yes, he was.
He was. What was that like when Ted Knight passed away, and trying to move past that?
It was very sad. It was a wake-up call for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Ted, unfortunately, got cancer and had had great success with his own television show after Mary's show. Ted had been a voiceover guy before Mary's show. For those of you who are Superman fans, the Superman cartoons of the 60s are all narrated by Ted. But Ted was not the happiest camper on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. He really felt that his character was not written in such a way that the character could grow, that everybody else's character grew and changed except his. So of all the people who were on the show, Ted was the least happy. But when you reach a certain age and your friends begin to pass away, it's hard. It was hard for everybody to deal with his death because it reminds all of us of our mortalities. I'm reaching an age now where this is the age where people begin to go. I'm not terribly old. I just turned 60 a few months ago.
I could have sworn you were 39.
See, this is why I come on this man's show as often as he'll have me. But yeah, losing my soulmate of 47 years, this is the time when people begin to go. Not everyone gets to be 97. And it was a wake-up call for everybody that, hey, life is short. You'd better enjoy it while you can. And I think that was, because I've spoken, except to Mary, to everybody else on the show, how they felt about Ted. And that was pretty much what I took away from everyone. A wake-up call, we'd better enjoy it while we can, because nobody is guaranteed anything more than today.
Yeah, Ted wasn't happy on Caddyshack either, apparently.
We could have another 2 hours about the big stars I've known who weren't happy with how their careers turned out. Kay Ballard, Jack Carter, Shelley Berman, wonderfully, geniusly talented people who felt they didn't become the big star they deserved to be. and their disappointment and frustration with it, rather than the gratitude that it happened at all.
I agree. I find that there's a lot of times that, and I've even thought about this on this show here, you know. There's times when I tried to get an interview with somebody, and I would go months and months, and it never works out. Or I'd have their contact lead me on, and I wind up disappointed that way. I always try to be grateful for the people I do get on, and I've had some pretty substantial people come on the show, and I try to be grateful about that, you know, and I find that people will just look over what they've done and appreciate. I think they could be a lot more content.
See, if you look over what you've done instead of overlooking what you've done,
Mm-hmm.
you live in gratitude. And
Yeah.
as long as you're living in gratitude, whatever else happens in your life, you can find contentment. Joy and happiness come and go. Contentment could be a daily thing, but you have to look for the contentment. One has to look for the contentment. I could have been a big star, but I'm a celebrity. And you know what? I say thank you every single day that talented men like you have me on their shows, think that what I have to say is worth listening to, that I have fans out there all over the world who want to hear what I have to say. And I go, thank you, because there are 50,000 other people out there who would love to have my career. And for whatever reasons, I got it.
Any last thoughts on Mary? We're closing in on 2 hours here,
I know we are. A brilliant, intelligent, gorgeous, talented woman whose personal life was difficult and whose professional life entertains and will continue to entertain generations of people. She deserved every bit of stardom that she got, no matter how she got there. And it is happy. It's a happy thing for me to talk about her because she was so ambitious, so talented, and loved show business. And anybody who loved show business is okay in my book.
Absolutely. Well, you know, Geoffrey, it's been wonderful doing these tributes with you. It's always great to have you on. I don't speak a whole lot on here when you're on here because you're just, I love listening to you tell your stories. I mean, you're great at it. No wonder you're such a wonderful writer, you know how to phrase stuff, and you certainly know how to keep a person's attention. So
I will be on with you as often as you will have me. As I tell people, my centennial of experience is 1875 to 1975. So anything in there, anybody you want to talk about, you just let me know when you want me, because you, sir, are a pleasure. You ask great questions, and you give the space for me to hopefully give great answers.
Yes. Well, before I let you go, you'd like to do a plug for my show?
I would love to do a plug for your show. All right. Hi, my name is Geoffrey Mark. We just celebrated 2 hours of Mary Tyler Moore on Greg Gilbert's Python's Paradise out of New Brunswick, Canada. And boy, do I love my Canadian friends.